Rosalind Pierce let out a cold laugh when she saw Carter Brooks walk through the glass doors of NorthHarbor Cold Logistics, carrying a little girl in his arms. It was open hiring day, and the lobby gleamed with polished marble and oversized banners proclaiming the company's commitment to finding tomorrow's leaders. But Carter looked nothing like tomorrow. His shirt was faded, his shoes worn at the edges, and his hands still carried the faint smell of machine oil. The child clung to his neck, her wide eyes scanning the crowd of executives in tailored suits. Rosalind turned away before he could speak. Clinton Hale stepped forward, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is this guy here for a job or a handout?" Scattered laughter rippled through the lobby. Carter did not argue. He simply asked for 10 minutes to present a plan that could save the failing system. Rosalind refused. Citing company policy and brand image, Carter glanced at a safety notice half hidden in the corner, his jaw tightening for just a moment. Then he lifted his daughter higher and walked out into the blazing sun. On Monday morning, an emergency meeting was called. The glass doors of the executive conference room swung open. Carter Brooks stepped inside, dressed in a perfectly fitted suit. William Sterling, chairman of the parent corporation, rose from his seat. "Allow me to introduce our new chief executive officer." Rosalind felt the blood drain from her face. The morning sun hit the NorthHarbor Tower like a blade. Inside, the air conditioning hummed against the coastal heat, but nothing could cool the tension that had been building for weeks. 3 workers had been injured in warehouse accidents over the past 2 months. Cargo had spoiled due to temperature failures. Partners were threatening lawsuits, and rumors spread that the parent company was preparing to clean house. The Open Hiring Day event was never really about finding talent. It was a performance designed to reassure investors and distract the media from the cracks forming beneath the surface. Rosalind had spent years climbing to her current position. She grew up in a small town where opportunities were scarce and judgment was swift. She learned early that appearance mattered, that being perceived as competent was often more valuable than competence itself. Now she stood at the entrance of the lobby like a gatekeeper, clipboard in hand, scanning every face that walked through the door. Her job was to filter out anyone who might embarrass the company in front of the cameras. When she saw Carter with his wrinkled shirt and his daughter's small fingers wrapped around his collar, she made her decision in seconds. He was a risk. He was not worth the 10 minutes he asked for. What Rosalind did not know was that Carter had been preparing for this moment for years. The folder tucked under his arm contained detailed analysis of NorthHarbor's supply chain vulnerabilities, warehouse traffic patterns, maintenance schedules, and sensor failure rates. He had studied the company's operations with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a critical procedure. He brought Bonnie because the babysitter canceled at the last minute, and he had no family to call. This was his only chance to get a position with better health insurance for his daughter. But none of that mattered to the people who looked at his clothes and saw only what they expected to see. Clinton Hale was exactly the kind of man who thrived in environments where perception mattered more than truth. He was a middle manager with an exceptional talent for flattering those above him and crushing those below. He had been with NorthHarbor for 8 years, surviving every restructuring and every scandal by making sure someone else took the blame. When he saw Carter standing in the lobby, he saw an opportunity to perform for Rosalind, to remind her that he was on her side, that they belonged to the same world of polished shoes and proper protocol. His mockery of Carter was calculated, designed to establish hierarchy and curry favor in the same breath. That Monday morning, when the emergency meeting was called, Rosalind walked into the conference room believing her moment had finally arrived. She had prepared a presentation outlining a recovery plan, complete with risk assessments and projected timelines. She was certain the parent company would need someone to lead the turnaround effort, and she intended to be that person. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as executives filed in, their faces tight with anxiety. Everyone knew that heads would roll. The only question was whose. The door opened, and Carter Brooks entered. He was transformed. The tired father from the lobby was gone, replaced by a man whose calm presence commanded the room. His suit was simple but immaculate. His eyes swept across the table, acknowledging each person without lingering. Rosalind felt her throat constrict. She remembered Clinton's joke, her own dismissive wave, the way she had turned her back without a second thought. Now that same man stood at the head of the table, while William Sterling introduced him as the new CEO, brought in to execute a 90-day stabilization plan, followed by a 180-day restructuring. Carter's first words set the tone for everything that would follow. "I am not here to be liked," he said. "I am here to save this system and the people who depend on it." He did not raise his voice. He did not make threats. But there was something in his eyes that suggested he had seen things that most people in this room could not imagine. He looked at Clinton for a single moment, a look that lasted no longer than a heartbeat. But Clinton's smile faltered. Then Carter made his first request. He wanted immediate access to all accident reports and maintenance logs from the past 3 years. Clinton immediately tried to redirect the conversation toward worker negligence. Carter listened without expression, then repeated his request. Over the next 72 hours, Rosalind discovered what it meant to be given the hardest assignment instead of being punished with public humiliation. Carter called her into his office and handed her a folder. Her task was to lead a team to audit the warehouse section with the highest accident rate. She would inspect the interlock systems on the cold storage doors, verify the calibration schedules for temperature and pressure sensors, cross-reference shift logs with system access records, and interview the floor workers about any verbal orders that contradicted official protocols. It was dirty work. It was dangerous to her reputation. If she found problems, she would be the one delivering bad news. If she found nothing, she would look incompetent. She wanted to refuse. But Carter was now her boss, and she had no grounds to object. Clinton approached her that afternoon with a sympathetic smile and an offer of assistance. He provided her with documents he claimed would make the audit easier. Maintenance records already compiled and organized. He also suggested she sign a preliminary completion form to show she was making progress. Rosalind hesitated. Something felt wrong, but she could not identify what. She took the documents but did not sign the form. Later that night, reviewing the files in her apartment, she noticed that several pages had been replaced with different paper stock, the texture slightly off, the printing just faintly misaligned. Carter established a rule that would become the foundation of his leadership. "I do not accept beautiful reports," he announced at the next staff meeting. "I accept true reports. Anyone who signs off on something they have not verified will be held accountable." He said this while looking directly at Rosalind. But there was no malice in his gaze. It was simply a statement of fact, a line drawn in the sand. She understood then that he was giving her a choice. She could continue playing the game she had always played, or she could do something different. The warehouse floor was nothing like the polished lobby upstairs. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and refrigerant. Forklifts beeped warnings as they maneuvered between towering stacks of crates. Rosalind walked through the aisles with Finn Callahan, a maintenance engineer who had been with the company for 12 years. Finn was the kind of man who said little, but noticed everything. He showed her the cold storage doors that malfunctioned intermittently, opening when they should stay closed, staying closed when workers needed to exit. He pointed to temperature sensors that displayed readings 10 degrees off from the independent thermometers he carried in his pocket. He showed her equipment that had been hastily repainted to cover cracks and corrosion. Silas Monroe had worked as a warehouse supervisor for 23 years. He was a large man with calloused hands and a voice roughened by decades of shouting over machinery. When Rosalind asked him about the accidents, he looked at her with the weary skepticism of someone who had seen too many managers come and go. "We report problems," he said. "They tell us not to make the numbers look bad. We get verbal orders to speed up loading to meet quotas. When someone gets hurt, suddenly it is our fault for not following procedures that nobody lets us follow." Rosalind wrote everything down, her handwriting growing smaller as the weight of his words settled on her shoulders. Bernice Hartwell represented the Workers' Safety Committee. She was a compact woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much corporate betrayal to trust easily. She cornered Rosalind near the loading dock. "You people upstairs only care about reports that make you look good," she said. "The people who get hurt are down here. The people who die are down here. You think your clean hands mean anything to us?" Rosalind wanted to defend herself, but the words would not come. She had spent her entire career keeping her hands clean by never touching anything that might leave a stain. Finn pulled Rosalind aside at the end of her second day in the warehouse. He had been digging through the computerized maintenance management system, and what he found made him nervous. Significant repair entries had been altered. The names of technicians who performed critical maintenance had been changed. Timestamps showed work being completed during shifts when no technicians were on duty. Someone had been manipulating the records, and they had been doing it for a long time. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing," Finn said. "This is not sloppy. This is systematic." Rosalind stared at the screen, watching lines of data scroll past. Each entry a small lie that contributed to something much larger. She faced a choice that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. If she dug deeper, she would inevitably uncover connections to Clinton, perhaps to others above her, perhaps to the very systems that had allowed her to rise through the ranks. Her career could be destroyed, but if she stayed silent, the accidents would continue. Someone else would be injured. Someone might die. Carter had not asked her to trust him. He had asked her to trust the evidence. He wanted facts, not feelings. He wanted documentation that could withstand legal scrutiny. Ingrid Brennan, the company's legal counsel, had already warned that if the falsified records were discovered by regulators, it would not be an internal matter. It would be criminal. The attack on Carter came from an unexpected direction. Clinton began spreading rumors through the company that the new CEO was using his daughter as a prop to generate sympathy. He suggested that bringing a child to a corporate event showed poor judgment, that Carter's turnaround experience was exaggerated, that the parent company had made a mistake. Vivian Cole, head of public relations, found herself trying to manage internal communications while Clinton quietly blocked her access to key information. The Whisper campaign was designed to undermine Carter before he could consolidate his authority. During a company family event designed to generate positive media coverage, Bonnie wandered away from her father for just a moment. She overheard adults speaking in harsh tones about her father, using words she did not fully understand, but whose cruelty was unmistakable. A staff member, not realizing who she was, roughly shooed her away from a restricted area. The little girl froze. Her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall, her small hands clutching the hem of her dress. When Carter found her, she was pressed against a wall, trying to make herself invisible. Carter's composure cracked for exactly 3 seconds. He did not shout. He did not make accusations, but his voice dropped to a register that made everyone within earshot stop moving. "Do not make a child carry the weight of adult wars," he said. The silence that followed was absolute. Rosalind witnessed this from across the room. She saw the way Carter's hands trembled slightly as he lifted Bonnie into his arms, the way he pressed his cheek against her hair as if drawing strength from her presence. For the first time, she saw him not as a threat or a superior, but as a father trying to protect his child in a world that offered no protection. Something shifted in Rosalind that afternoon. She found Bonnie sitting alone on a bench outside the event hall, and without thinking, she brought the girl a cup of juice and sat beside her. She did not try to explain or apologize. She simply sat there, a quiet presence, until Bonnie's rigid posture slowly relaxed. Later, Rosalind sought out Vivian and asked her to ensure that Bonnie would not be used in any promotional materials. It was a small thing, but it was the first time in years that Rosalind had acted without calculating the benefit to her career. Carter acknowledged her gesture with neither warmth nor coldness. "I do not need apologies," he said when she tried to explain. "I need you to do the right thing." His words carried no judgment, only a simple statement of what he required. Rosalind understood that redemption would not come through words. It would come through action, through choices made when no one was watching, through the willingness to pay a price. That night, sorting through old emails as part of her documentation process, Rosalind found something that made her blood run cold. Buried in her sent folder was a message from 18 months ago, a message she barely remembered sending. Clinton had asked her to confirm that a routine safety inspection had been completed. She had signed off without actually going down to the warehouse. At the time, it seemed like nothing. Everyone did it. The pressure to meet deadlines was enormous. But now, looking at that email, she saw her own signature attached to a lie that might have contributed to someone's injury. The document Clinton had offered her during the audit was connected to this chain of falsifications. He was not trying to help her. He was trying to implicate her. Clinton found her in the break room the next morning. His smile was the same as always, friendly on the surface with something cold underneath. "I hear you have been asking questions," he said. "Be careful. Rosalind, you have your own signatures on some of those documents. If you dig too deep, you might not like what you find." He leaned closer. "I can protect you. All you have to do is stop looking." He framed it as an offer of alliance, but Rosalind heard it for what it was: cooperate or be destroyed. She spent the next several days in a state of agonizing indecision. If she confessed her past mistake, she would lose everything she had worked for. Her reputation would be ruined. She might face legal consequences. But if she allowed Clinton to use her fear as a weapon, she would become his accomplice in whatever he was hiding. She would spend the rest of her life knowing that her silence had enabled harm to continue. Carter seemed to sense her struggle. He did not press her. Instead, he told her a story. It was brief, delivered without drama. He spoke of a person who had died because a series of small compromises by many people had created conditions where tragedy became inevitable. Everyone had told themselves that someone else would catch the problem. No one had. Rosalind listened, and though Carter did not say who the person was, something in his voice told her it was not an abstract example. Finn delivered another piece of the puzzle. Security footage from the warehouse had a 7-minute gap on the day of the most recent accident. Someone had accessed the system and deleted a specific segment. Someone who knew exactly which cameras covered which areas and exactly how long the deletion would take. This was not an accident or a glitch, Finn explained. Someone deliberately erased evidence. The deadline was approaching. Regulators would arrive in 48 hours. Ingrid warned that if they discovered the manipulation during their inspection, NorthHarbor could lose its operating license. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Ingrid had been reviewing historical accident records as part of her preparation for the regulatory visit. Among the files was a case from several years ago, a serious incident that had been closed with a finding of worker error. The investigation had been rushed. The documentation was suspiciously thin. The name of the victim was Helen Brooks. She had been Carter's wife. She had died in a warehouse accident at this very company. Working a shift when safety systems failed and no one came to help her in time. The official report blamed her for being in the wrong place. The real blame belonged to a system that had been compromised long before that night. Rosalind read the file 3 times, unable to process what she was seeing. Carter had not come to NorthHarbor for a job. He had not come for revenge in the petty sense. He had come to expose the truth about how his wife had died, and to prevent the same thing from happening to anyone else. The man she had dismissed in the lobby, the man she had judged by his worn shoes and tired face, had been carrying this weight for years. She understood now why he looked at the safety notice on that first day. She understood the depth of his restraint when Clinton mocked him. She understood why he demanded truth instead of beautiful reports. Further investigation revealed that Clinton had been the supervisor responsible for the maintenance systems at the time of Helen's death. He had survived the fallout by ensuring that the blame fell downward onto workers who could not defend themselves. He had been promoted twice since then. His entire career had been built on a foundation of covered-up negligence and falsified records. Rosalind saw clearly for the first time the machinery of complicity that had allowed someone like Clinton to thrive. She had been part of that machinery. Her careless signature, her willingness to look the other way, her prioritization of appearance over substance. She was not as guilty as Clinton. But she was not innocent either. She made her decision alone, sitting in her apartment at 2 a.m. She would confess her own failure and offer to testify against Clinton in exchange for the opportunity to help expose the full scope of the corruption. It was the hardest choice she had ever made. She knew it might end her career. She knew people would remember her as someone who had signed false documents. But she also knew that this was the only path that did not lead to becoming the person Clinton wanted her to be. The night before the regulatory inspection, disaster struck. One of the main cold storage units lost power. The backup system failed to activate. Thousands of dollars worth of perishable goods were at risk of spoiling. Partners flooded the communication lines with threats of legal action. Clinton seized the moment like a predator sensing wounded prey. He began loudly suggesting that the chaos was a direct result of Carter's leadership, that the new CEO had destabilized systems that were functioning before his arrival. It was a calculated move designed to create doubt in the minds of anyone who might be watching. Carter responded like an engineer rather than a politician. He did not waste time defending himself. Instead, he ordered an immediate forensic examination of the power system and the backup generator. He wanted access logs, maintenance records, and security footage from the technical rooms, while others panicked. He worked methodically, following evidence rather than emotion. Rosalind watched him coordinate the response and saw something she had rarely seen in corporate leadership. He actually knew what he was doing. He was not performing competence. He possessed it. Rosalind took an enormous risk. She secretly forwarded the documentation she had gathered to Ingrid, including emails that proved Clinton had interfered with safety protocols and her own confession of the signature she should never have provided. If Clinton discovered what she had done before, she could present the evidence publicly. He would destroy her. She could feel his suspicion growing, his eyes following her through the office, his casual questions probing for information. Every hour felt like a countdown to explosion. The workers began to shift their allegiances. Silas and Bernice had watched Carter closely since his arrival, waiting to see if he was different from the managers who had come before. They saw him walk the warehouse floor, asking questions and actually listening to the answers. They saw him override Clinton's objections to implement immediate safety improvements, even small ones that cost money and slowed productivity. For the first time in years. Someone from the executive level seemed to understand that the people on the ground were not statistics to be managed, but human beings whose lives depended on systems working correctly. Silas agreed to provide a formal statement about the verbal orders that had pressured workers to bypass safety procedures. Bernice offered to testify about the pattern of ignored reports and suppressed complaints. Bonnie asked her father a question that nearly broke him. "Daddy, are you going to get fired?" Carter paused, kneeling down to meet her eyes. He could have lied. He could have offered false comfort. Instead, he told her a version of the truth that she could understand. Daddy is going to do the right thing, even if some people do not like it. The little girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood more than her age should allow. That night, Carter held her hand until she fell asleep, wondering what kind of world he was preparing her for. Finn traced the power failure to its source. The access logs showed that Clinton had entered the technical room 3 hours before the outage. The backup system had been manually disabled, a procedure that required specific authorization codes. Clinton had used his credentials, apparently believing that the chaos would provide cover for his tracks. But Finn had been thorough. He had pulled redundant logs from a secondary server that Clinton did not know existed. The evidence was clear. Clinton had sabotaged the system to discredit Carter, and he had done it on the eve of a regulatory inspection that could determine the fate of the entire company. The confrontation took place in the largest conference room in the building. Carter convened an expanded meeting that included William from the parent company, Henry, the CFO, George from Human Resources, Ingrid from Legal, representatives from the Safety Committee, Bernice, Silas, Finn, and Vivian to document the proceedings accurately. Clinton arrived with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. He had prepared a presentation blaming worker negligence and leadership instability. He expected to walk out of this meeting with his reputation enhanced and Carter weakened. Clinton began his performance with practiced sincerity. He expressed concern for the company. He cited statistics about industry-wide accident rates. He suggested that the real problem was a workforce that had become complacent under previous leadership. He implied that Carter's aggressive approach was creating fear and instability. It was a masterful display of corporate theater, the kind of speech that had protected him for years. Carter let him finish. Then, without raising his voice, he began to present evidence. He showed access logs proving that Clinton had entered the technical room before the power failure. He displayed security footage that Clinton did not know had been recovered from backup servers. He presented maintenance records that had been altered, with timestamps that contradicted Clinton's claimed whereabouts. He produced invoices for repairs that were never performed, payments to vendors that did not exist. Signatures on documents from people who were not working on the dates indicated. Each piece of evidence was specific, documented, and verifiable. Rosalind stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but her voice was clear. She admitted to signing a safety confirmation 18 months ago without actually completing the inspection. She explained how Clinton had pressured her, how she had rationalized the decision, how she had convinced herself that everyone did it. She looked directly at the assembled group. I was wrong. I took a shortcut because I was afraid of looking uncooperative. But Clinton built this into a system. He used people's fear and ambition to create a network of small lies that added up to something deadly. Her confession was not a defense. It was an indictment. She was offering herself as proof that Clinton's methods were deliberate and widespread. Clinton lost his composure. His face flushed red as he accused Carter of personal vendetta, of using his position to settle old scores. He demanded to know what gave Carter the right to investigate him. Carter remained silent for a moment. Then he opened a folder and placed a single document on the table. It was Helen's death certificate, accompanied by the original accident report. "This is not personal," Carter said quietly. "This is the price of lies. My wife died in this building because people like you decided that covering up problems was easier than fixing them. I am not here for revenge. I am here to make sure it does not happen again." William Sterling had seen enough. He announced Clinton's immediate suspension pending a full investigation. Ingrid informed the room that all relevant documentation would be forwarded to the appropriate regulatory authorities. The company would cooperate fully with any external inquiry. There would be no cover-up, no quiet settlement, no convenient transfer to another division. Clinton was escorted from the building within the hour, his protests echoing uselessly through the hallways. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks. Clinton faced criminal charges related to fraud, evidence tampering, and reckless endangerment. Rosalind received a formal reprimand and was temporarily demoted to a position with field responsibilities rather than management authority. It was a real consequence for a real mistake. She accepted it without complaint, understanding that she was being given an opportunity that many others had never received, the chance to prove that she could become someone better. Carter implemented a comprehensive reform plan. The first 30 days focused on establishing proper safety protocols, securing system access, and auditing all vendor relationships. The next 60 days involved retraining supervisors, creating whistleblower protections, and establishing anonymous reporting channels. By 90 days, the company was renegotiating contracts based on transparency and verifiable compliance. Bernice was appointed to a newly created Safety Oversight Committee, the first time in the company's history that workers had genuine representation in decisions that affected their lives. Rosalind learned to work differently. She spent time on the warehouse floor, talking with workers, listening to their concerns, admitting when she did not know something. She stopped treating appearance as a substitute for substance. She made mistakes and owned them publicly. It was uncomfortable and humbling, and sometimes painful. It was also the first time in years that she felt like she was actually doing something worthwhile. Carter found moments of peace he had not experienced since Helen's death. The systems were stabilizing. The company was beginning to heal. He could look at the warehouse where his wife had died and see something other than a monument to failure. It would never be fully right. Helen was gone, and no amount of justice could bring her back. But her death had not been in vain. The truth had been told. Changes had been made. Other families would not suffer the same loss. On a warm afternoon, several weeks after Clinton's removal, Carter walked to the parking lot with Bonnie. The sun was setting over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Rosalind stood near the warehouse entrance, her clothes dusty from a day spent actually doing the work she had once only supervised. She was not the polished executive who had dismissed him in the lobby. She was tired and uncertain and real. She walked toward them slowly. "If I had not turned you away that day," she began. Carter shook his head gently. "What matters is what we do now." Bonnie tugged at Rosalind's hand. The little girl had slowly warmed to her over the past weeks, accepting her presence with the uncomplicated trust that only children can offer. "Are you coming to read me a story again?" Bonnie asked. Rosalind laughed, and there were tears in her eyes, not because she had been forgiven, but because she had finally become someone worth forgiving. They walked together toward the car, 3 people carrying different wounds, moving toward something that might one day become whole. The harbor stretched out before them, glittering in the fading light. Behind them, the NorthHarbor Tower stood against the sky, no longer a monument to corruption, but a place where truth had finally found a voice. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real.